On a cool spring morning in 1623, the marble corridors of Topkapi Palace echoed with a sound that no soldier's shout or enemy's curse could rival. It was the scream of a young girl, just 15 years old, whose life was about to be rewritten in ways history worked hard to conceal. That girl was Princess Fatma Sultan, daughter of one of the most powerful rulers in the world. To the empire, she was a jewel. To her family, she was a bargaining tool. And on this particular dawn, she became something more, a reminder that behind the glitter of royal palaces lay stories too painful for official records. From the outside, the life of an Ottoman princess looked like a dream. Silks, jewels, gardens perfumed with roses, the envy of every court in Europe. But what outsiders could not see were the invisible chains woven into their destiny, chains that no amount of wealth or beauty could break. For centuries, the empire kept a secret, a ritual reserved only for its daughters of blood, a ritual meant to prepare them for marriage, yet one that stripped them of their spirit before they had even grown into women. Official histories buried it, poets ignored it, but in forgotten archives and coded notes, fragments of the truth survived. Today, we uncover one of those truths, not as a fairy tale, not as a romance, but as a haunting story of power, silence, and sacrifice. The story of why Ottoman princesses, surrounded by every luxury, learned to fear the very night meant to crown their womanhood. For more than 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire stretched like an unbroken tide across 3 continents. From the deserts of Arabia to the gates of Vienna, its armies carried banners of conquest, and its rulers spoke with authority that shook kings and popes alike. At the very heart of this empire stood Istanbul, once Constantinople, now the radiant capital crowned with domes, minarets, and the glittering jewel of power, Topkapi Palace. Behind its walls lay a universe that outsiders could only imagine, a place whispered about in Europe with both envy and fear, the imperial harem. The harem was not simply a sanctuary of beauty and leisure. It was a fortress of politics. Inside, more than 800 women lived, concubines, attendants, mothers of princes, and daughters of sultans. Every breath was measured, every gesture watched. One mistake could mean disgrace. One clever alliance could mean a throne behind the throne. And here lies the irony. The women with the least freedom, Christian slaves captured in raids, or young girls sold in distant markets, sometimes rose to heights of unimaginable influence. Through wit, loyalty, or sheer determination, they could become powerful favorites, even mothers of future sultans. History remembers names like Hürrem Sultan and Kosum Sultan, women who shaped the empire itself. But the daughters of the sultan? Their path was far harsher. Unlike the concubines, they were not permitted ambition. They could not play the game of survival or chase the sultan's favor. Their fate was decided before their first breath. They were pawns, their marriages arranged to secure alliances, pacify rivals, or reward loyalty. In this delicate web, the role of an Ottoman princess was not to live, but to be given. Her hand in marriage was currency, her body a signature on a treaty, and for that purpose, a ritual was designed, a ritual more suffocating than any prison. And so, while the harem sparkled with music, poetry, and the whispers of power, another story unfolded in the shadows. The story of the princesses who, beneath their veils and jewels, were being slowly stripped of their freedom and often of themselves. In the year 1606, within the perfumed gardens of Topkapi Palace, Princess Fatma Sultan was born. She was the daughter of Sultan Ahmed I, the ruler who raised the famous Blue Mosque, and of Kosum Sultan, a woman destined to become one of the most powerful figures in Ottoman history. From the very beginning, Fatma's life seemed touched by fortune. Unlike many noble children of the time, she was not only surrounded by luxury, but also immersed in learning. Fatma devoured books of astronomy and philosophy, recited poetry in Persian, debated scholars in history and law. By her teenage years, she could write in 4 languages, and her calligraphy was praised as if it were spun from silk. Chroniclers described her as radiant in both mind and beauty, a jewel whose brilliance could illuminate the palace halls. But brilliance was never her choice to keep. Long before she read her first poem or traced the stars with eager eyes. Her destiny had already been written. Royal daughters were not free to follow their talents, nor to dream of the skies. They were coins in the empire's treasury of politics, tokens to be spent on alliances and loyalty. For Fatma, that coin was placed into the hands of Kara Mustafa Pasha, a hardened commander, 20 years her senior. To him, marriage to a princess meant power, a path to influence at court. To her, it was the closing of a door she had never been allowed to open. And so, while her peers in the harem competed for the sultan's gaze or plotted subtle intrigues, Fatma's fate was sealed. She would leave behind her studies, her gardens, her dreams of the stars, and step into a ritual designed to break her spirit before the wedding night even arrived. This was not simply marriage. It was something far older, carefully preserved and polished by centuries of tradition, the preparation of a princess. 3 months before her wedding, Princess Fatma's world shifted from gardens and manuscripts to confinement and control. She was led into a chamber known as the Bride's Hall, a place adorned with silks and ebony, yet more prison than sanctuary. From that moment, her life was no longer her own. Every hour of her day was consumed by ritual. She was drilled in postures of submission, 18 different bows, each with its purpose: how to greet, how to serve, how to wait silently for a husband she did not choose. Even her footsteps were choreographed, measured, slow, head tilted at a precise angle, hands never lifted above her heart. But the cruelest lesson was her voice. Her words were cut down to a list of 43 permitted phrases: gratitude, apology, acceptance. Nothing more. Independent thought, a spark of defiance, even a question, all were punished. Sometimes by fasting, sometimes by isolation, sometimes by the humiliation of being corrected in front of others. Her overseer was an elder woman of the harem, experienced in shaping princesses into shadows. Day by day, Fatma felt her identity stripped away. The brilliant girl who debated scholars was replaced by a silent figure, drilled to obey without thought. And the ritual did not end there. Beneath the palace, in chambers hidden from view, replicas of bridal rooms had been built. There, Fatma was forced to rehearse her wedding night, not with people, but with lifeless figures crafted for the purpose. Her fear, her resistance, even her tears were carefully observed and recorded. If she resisted, the training grew harsher. If she cried, the punishment was silence. What was called sacred education was in truth a systematic breaking of spirit. By the time weeks passed, Fatma's brilliance was dimming. Her laughter had faded. Her dreams of the stars seemed impossibly far away. She was no longer a child of emperors. She was being remade into an instrument of obedience. And still, the most suffocating stage was yet to come. A week before the wedding, Fatma Sultan was moved once more, this time into the bride's pavilion, an isolated chamber cut off from the palace's hum. No sounds of the city reached her there, no laughter of courtiers, no whispers of servants, only silence and the watchful eyes of attendants. Here, every detail of her existence was controlled. Her meals were prescribed with precision: pomegranates, almonds, goat's milk, honey, spiced concoctions said to purify the body and calm the will. Baths were no longer moments of comfort, but ceremonies. Oils laced with valerian, poppy, and orange blossom were poured over her skin, mixtures crafted by alchemists who claimed they soothed the mind while dulling resistance. Even the walls were enlisted in her conditioning, draped in tapestries depicting perfect wives, obedient, fertile, loyal. They surrounded her with silent commands. And then there were the mirrors, Venetian glass polished to flawless clarity, positioned so that wherever she turned, Fatma was forced to watch herself. This practice, once a Sufi exercise in reflection, had been twisted into something darker. She was made to observe every movement, every expression, until she began policing even her thoughts. The longer she stayed, the less she recognized the girl staring back at her. Day by day, her spirit withered. She no longer laughed. She no longer argued. She no longer reached for books or stars. She became what the empire demanded, a silent vessel, polished and prepared for a destiny she had no power to refuse. And then, as March 1623 approached, Istanbul erupted in celebration. To the outside world, the city prepared for a royal wedding of splendor. Inside the palace, Fatma prepared for something very different. The night that history would remember only through echoes of her scream. On the morning of March 15th, 1623, Istanbul awoke like a beating drum. The streets swelled with processions, music, and incense. Soldiers paraded with banners. Dancers twirled in bright silks, and feasts spilled across golden plates. To the city, it was a festival, a vision of empire's glory, a marriage binding power and loyalty. But while the crowds roared with celebration, inside Topkapi Palace, Princess Fatma sat in silence. Chroniclers would later write of her pale lips, her trembling hands, her gaze fixed on nothing. To the people outside, she was a symbol of majesty. To those close enough to see, she was a figure already collapsing under invisible weight. Doctors of the palace noted her symptoms in careful detail. Shallow breaths, sudden sweats, a refusal to eat. Today we would name it panic. Then it was called fragility, a weakness to be corrected, not understood. When the banquets ended and the crowds dispersed, the true ceremony began. Fatma was led not into joy, but into a pavilion built centuries before, for this very moment, a place designed not for comfort, but for surrender. Its architecture spoke its purpose, 3 levels, each devoted to stripping away another layer of her will. The first floor was for purification, ritual baths in rosewater, and oils laced with substances that softened the body while clouding the mind. The second was for submission, where her bridal gown, heavy with pearls and gold, became less an adornment than a restraint. Anklets slowed her steps. The crown bent her neck. Even beauty was turned into a cage. And finally, there was the third level, the chamber where the wedding night awaited. Its walls bore scenes of conquest, its furniture arranged to remind her that this was not union, but victory. To the empire, this night was the sealing of loyalty. To Fatma, it was the opening of a wound that would never heal. As the doors of the pavilion closed behind her, Princess Fatma was left alone with a man twice her age, Kara Mustafa Pasha, her new husband. For him, this was triumph. The marriage to a sultan's daughter, the proof of loyalty, the ladder to power. For her, it was the edge of a precipice. What followed that night was never meant for public record. Yet fragments survive in coded documents and medical notes. They speak of a girl whose body trembled uncontrollably, whose voice dwindled to whispers before falling into silence. Her eyes seemed to wander to a world far beyond the chamber, as if her spirit had fled where her body could not. Ottoman physicians of the time gave it a name, sakma, the collapse of the soul. Modern words would call it shock or dissociation, a mind retreating to survive what it cannot bear. Mustafa Pasha, schooled by his advisors in intimidation and dominance, expected resistance. Instead, he found absence. There was no fight to overcome, no rebellion to crush, only a void. The girl who had debated scholars, who once dreamed of stars, was gone. In her place remained silence. The following days revealed the depth of her wound. Fatma spoke little, often refusing food until attendants fed her by hand. She wept without reason for hours, or sat staring as if time itself had lost meaning. The mere presence of a man, even a eunuch trusted in the harem, sent her into fits of panic, rapid breathing, fainting, trembling. Doctors described it with cold detachment, virginal melancholy, a condition they deemed common among princesses after marriage. But beneath the language was a truth too obvious to ignore. The empire's ritual had broken its own daughters. Fatma had become a shadow. And though she lived on for nearly 3 decades, the brilliance that once lit the palace had been extinguished forever. For 29 more years, Princess Fatma remained alive in body, but dim in spirit. She became a ceremonial figure, a wife in name, a mother by duty. Behind palace walls, however, she was little more than a ghost. Her books gathered dust, her instruments fell silent, and the gardens where she once debated scholars became empty paths she no longer walked. In 1652, Fatma Sultan died at the age of 46. Official records claimed a fever of the brain. Yet the date of her death, falling on the very anniversary of her wedding, was seen by many in the court as no coincidence. For them, it was as though the memory of that night finally closed its hand around her soul. But Fatma's tragedy was not hers alone. Hidden records tell of other princesses who met the same fate. Some were silenced into mutism, others slipped into madness. A few disappeared entirely from the chronicles, erased as though they had never existed. What survived were whispers in coded notes, traces in forgotten manuscripts, fragments in secret archives. And yet, within those shadows, there were sparks of resistance. A princess who faked her own death to avoid remarriage. Sisters who created secret codes to share their grief. Even a few who, with unthinkable courage, petitioned the Sultan himself for divorce. Their stories, buried for centuries, reveal that even in the deepest silence, whispers of defiance endured. The tale of Fatma Sultan is not simply one chapter of Ottoman history. It is a mirror of dynasties everywhere. Behind crowns and ceremonies, power often devoured its own children. The world imagined Ottoman princesses as glittering figures draped in silks and jewels. The truth is that many bore invisible chains, sacrificed in rituals disguised as duty. When we hear the scream that echoed through Topkapi Palace in 1623, we are hearing more than one voice. We are hearing all the voices that history tried to erase. They remind us that behind every golden palace lies a price often paid in silence, and that the grandeur of empires is rarely as radiant as it seems. And so, the question lingers. How many other stories remain hidden in the archives of Europe, Russia, or China? How many princesses were consumed by rituals, buried in euphemism and ceremony? Perhaps even now, countless voices wait for someone willing to listen. If Fatma's story has unsettled you, if it has shaken your image of crowns and palaces, then let it serve its purpose. Share it, remember it, and let it guide us to uncover more of history's disguises. For only by peeling away those layers can we finally give voice to the silenced daughters of power.